Bippity bap boom. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Topical Idiocy. Whoa! My name is Shlok and I'm joined here by my co-host Aarman, where we strive to talk about and tackle questions that we're not really qualified to answer. Now, what's today's question, Aarman?
So we thought about discussing, and this is a common thing I've heard recently, following the end of the Democratic primary, and just in general, this is a question that's been plaguing politics: is why has the political process yielded disappointing candidates that really people can't get energized about?
Yeah.
And we wanted to limit our focus not actually to the presidential candidates, but rather more of the um, congressional candidates, focusing on the Senate and the House of Representatives, because of course that's where most of these politicians start, or not start, but go through.
And actually, what's interesting is that we're not focusing on presidential candidates, but a lot of the people that end up running to become president come from Congress anyway. So it does work out eventually. We really want to do a sort of like a goal on this podcast. We want to strive to talk about the sort of roots of problems rather than just the symptoms. It's sort of like a little philosophy, if you may, like without sounding too pretentious, but it's kind of a thing that we'd rather do. So instead of talking about just why things are so irritating, why we don't like it, we'd rather just talk about the cause of them. And so this is definitely one of the biggest ones on our list. I know that Trump is definitely a kind of fun thing to talk about, but this is also awesome. So anyway.
And I think also the interesting thing about this topic is it's applicable not just to our Trump dystopia or utopia to some, but mainly just the political system in general. This has
For
been a
sure.
problem plaguing us for the past, we'll discuss how long soon. But yeah, let's get started. So
Absolutely.
as with most of our topics so far, we've recently, how do we think and why do we think that there is such, that the candidates are disappointing? Do we think is it
I
our
mean,
view?
first we have to evaluate, are the candidates that are being proven, are they actually bad, or is it just an overblown sentiment? I mean, sentiments get overblown, right? That's kind of what the media does for a living. And it seems it's possible that maybe most people actually like congressional candidates and they actually like the process. Is this true?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm
So
so sorry. I'm so sorry. I just think I'm trying to think, how do we format this? Should we do like the topic sentences and stuff, or should we just do like a flow kind of
let's
thing?
do something that flows.
Just flows. Okay, yeah, cool. So forget I did that. But yeah, anyway.
It's okay. Continuing. Well, let's restart that then.
Yeah.
So before we actually talk about the whys of why the political process, or the reasons why the political process has resulted in such candidates, Shlok, why do you think that these candidates are disappointing, and why do you think it's just an us or a millennial thinking and mindset, or do you think this is the broad American population that views their representatives as poor or just not representing their interests?
Do you want me to reference the data right now, or what? What is this? Is this a lead on?
This is more just like for you to. I
Okay,
was
yeah.
thinking this is an open-ended way for you to talk about whatever.
Sure. This is just an open-ended way for me to talk about my own opinions about it, and then we can bring in the actual facts to sort
Totally.
of see
Yeah.
whether it comes in. Perfect.
Hmm.
So, yeah, okay, yeah, great question. So personally, from my perspective, which incidentally, both of those things mean the same thing. So it was a redundant intro to a sentence anyway. So anyway,
Okay.
personally, yeah, I think congressional candidates are poor, but I think that most politicians are not great representatives of, you know, its people, and they are not. I don't subscribe to the whole like all politicians are crooked, but I do think that their incentives are a little misaligned. Now, we don't really go into this. Really, we weren't really thinking about a lot of this, but I think I I think this is true based on just the results of the political process and the results of the legislation these people put through. I
Hmm.
think that if we had congressional population that like better represented the American country, we probably wouldn't have the 2008 financial crisis, or probably wouldn't have affected as many people. I think that if we had a better congressional population, we wouldn't have had, like, we would have had more resistance to the Iraq War. We would have had like more. Do you get what I mean?
Hmm.
It's more of just the sort of problems that have plagued America. We would have had less of them, at least.
Hmm.
More likely, none of them, if we had a better Congress. So
Hmm.
yeah, in my opinion, I think these problems do definitely exist. So
I think
that's
also,
just how I see it.
yeah, and I think also just comparing the US to our European neighbors across the pond, um, we seem to have a huge problem with divisiveness, and I guess the like furthering of
Yeah,
both political ideologies. Whereas
yeah.
in Europe, it seems, of course, there are like notable exceptions. Um, France, Germany, and the UK, for instance, being big examples of like not as clear thinking, but it seems at least in every presidential race, the margins are so close. I can't imagine how what was it? It was only like with Nixon's second term election, for instance, sweep the floor, won almost every state. Of course, Watergate, but it's hard to imagine.
What an
Uh,
idiot, right? Right? Isn't that just like a
right,
stupid? Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
but it's just so hard to imagine Americans really riling behind one candidate.
Yeah.
Whereas we see that in a lot of, for example, like Norwegian countries. That's a pretty big thing. Politics isn't seen as the sport as it is in the US. Um, like the
Yeah.
UK, of course, is a different example,
The
but
UK has like how it's like a week. It's on the order of weeks, right? The whole political process.
yeah, their campaigning
Yeah.
actually is only for I think it's 6 weeks. Um, and it's really strange
Yeah.
because they're not propping individual people; they're promoting ideologies. Just with the parliamentary system, because UK citizens don't actually vote for the prime minister; they vote for the party, and the party then chooses the prime minister. There's a sort of like insulation, um, which that's how we saw the change from Theresa May to Boris Johnson without the election happening. That was just an internal party making. And so we don't have that in the US. And
We
so it's,
definitely should talk about. Well, I think the internal party thing is a. I think that's good that we don't have it personally in the form of like a presidency kind of thing. But I think that we should definitely talk about that in a future episode
Mhm.
of the sort of. We actually will get into it a little bit, just of the like toll that campaigning can take, and the fact that that can be a barrier for other politicians, like new faces, to get in.
Mhm.
But that's definitely a very interesting thing to talk about for sure.
Mhm. But just going on to like focusing it back on the US, in my personal opinion, primaries matter much more than the general election.
Yeah.
Um, and that's because there's a interesting philosophical idea from Kant, Immanuel Kant. He talked about the idea of freedom. In order to have true freedom, you need to also be able to have agency over your choices. And because because turnout in the primaries is so much lower than the general, we barely get options. It's this candidate, that candidate, Democratic or Republican, when
Yeah.
really we don't even get to choose that much of the actual primary. Um,
And then by the time the primary happens, you already know who you're going to vote for if you're a Democrat or a Republican, say for a few people,
mhm.
right? So, yeah, for sure. Wow. So we should probably get into the, oh, that's
Wait,
not a
I think you
natural
should.
transition.
I think you should try to refer to the polling at least somewhere in there. Um,
No, no, no. I definitely want to. I see what you're trying to get me to do. Okay, okay, okay.
yeah, because I want to follow like what
I
the
was
research
thinking
we
of
have.
we were just gonna. I thought we were letting the research guide us, but you're doing the other way around, which makes more sense because no one wants to listen to two people talk about research that they did.
Mhm.
But anyway,
Well,
anyway,
I think like
yeah,
it is pretty interesting, and so definitely like mention it at some point. Like even just spending a little bit of time talking about
for
it.
sure. Yeah, I was under the impression that I was just gonna get into it afterwards, but that is not what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get into it
Yeah.
now. So anyway, I am under the impression that the political process it does yield bad candidates, but that's based on just my assumption about like, historical, economic tragedies, financial tragedies, like whatever, warfare, all that stuff. To me, it seems like the result, or at least partially the result of bad legislation, which is the result of a bad Congress. Now, what's your opinion before
Well,
we
my
get into?
opinion, I think it's interesting how you view disappointing candidates as those who fail to tackle issues properly, um,
Yeah.
which is an interesting way of putting it. I view it more, and I think most people would view it in my lens, but of course, yours is by all means great and beautiful. Um,
Wow.
I view
Yeah. Okay. Let's get into this.
I view disappointing as just not aligning with my specific ideological goals and my specific
For sure.
ideology.
For sure.
Um, though, of course, yours does have a lot of merit and is a lot less
I'm
selfish
not
than
here for
mine.
participation trophies, Arman. I'm gonna be fine. It's just that this is the last podcast episode we're ever making, so it's fine. It's fine.
That is not true. Um,
No, I think I only go by a results based thing because I get a little exhausted having to pay attention to candidates themselves, and I feel, and again, I
it's
think we
hard.
should talk about this. We should talk about this in a future episode too. But just American politics by putting candidates as the forefront of the party, I think that is a mistake because I think that
Mhm,
ultimately you should vote for, ideologies and you should vote for political positions. And
mhm.
I think ultimately that's more productive, that gets more things done. And then later you don't seem confused as to whether what you wanted to happen happened or not.
Mhm.
Because I still don't know if Barack Obama accomplished all the goals that he put forth. All I know is that he hoped, which is like not
Yeah,
a
and again, this
that's not
is
a political
another
thing.
comment. This is I was speaking to a Republican friend of mine from Alabama, actually yesterday, last night,
Ooh, yeah.
and he was saying just how disappointed he was in Trump because he was a fake conservative in his opinion. That like Trump was being a fake conservative, um,
Yes.
and it's the whole idea of, and I expressed my similar dismay at just was Obama a genuine progressive? I don't know. And of course, like it was 2008, we were in a very different time as a country and even ideologically. But if we voted more on ideology and we tested politicians more on ideology, where would we be? Um, and I guess like how more like would we be more satisfied?
Yeah. It's a good point. And I mean, I think it's hard because I think as Americans, we really love the emotional
Mhm.
context and the emotional implications of a lot of things. And so we love seeing action movies and we love seeing superhero films and everything. And in that same sense, we really love seeing conflict in our politics and we love seeing figureheads. Like those are way more fun, but
Mhm.
we really need to be more data driven completely.
Mhm.
I think that's how we beat a lot of problems and that's how we sort of succeed. And I've always harped on to Arman about like, if we really just had like an app that just represented whether this politician accomplished what they did or not, that would be so much more illuminating than like 1,000 hours of CNN. You get what I'm saying?
Mhm. No,
Like
I
it's
agree.
more fun to watch CNN, but like the amount of actual analysis that they do that's like genuinely
It's
valuable,
minimal.
it definitely feels minimal. And I'm not saying that they don't do any analysis. They have political scientists on, they have experts. I put experts in quotations because I realize this is an audio podcast, but like in the sense of like a lot of how stupid would it be if I just do a lot of gestures and like it's very expressive, and then
Mhm.
someone listening's like, "What? Shlok just doesn't say anything." But anyway, the but as in like CNN will put together like a lot of panels and everything, and it'll be a lot of like harping on about things that don't end up mattering.
Mhm.
So you know,
And I think and that goes into like a really interesting mindset for like incumbents. Um, what do they need to do? They need to win an election, sure. But how do they do that? They need to stand out and create their own sort of public image outside of the party.
for
And
sure.
whether that's done through local televisions or local news, well, local news is dying um,
Yeah, yeah,
quite easily. And so what we see is, for example, like Adam Schiff, for instance, everyone knows who he is because of his numerous appearances on CNN. Who knows about the other congressmen on the panel, on his committee? Who knows about the other, um, like how many congressmen can we really name besides our own? It's so few because so many few congressmen have access to the same, um, I guess, like attention that
I can
CNN,
name like
MSNBC,
10.
and Fox News would give them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, you
it's
could
hard.
definitely
It's
name more. No, 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 but like
not
yeah,
by much though. Quite
yeah,
honestly, not by
it's,
much.
I don't know if necessarily naming a lot of congressmen is a perfect measure of whether your democracy is working or not. But not that I completely disqualify it. I'm not you, right? I'm not gonna. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, in the sense of, I think that like I think what a real failure is that most people probably don't know their own congressman. Do you know?
True. No, no doubt.
Like, I don't know my. I don't for sure know like the Illinois congressman. I don't. I just
Mm.
put the state I live in out there, but I don't. I don't know them.
Yeah.
I don't think I know them. So that's a problem, and I think we don't have a lot of involvement in local politics. But anyway, as per the original question of whether you think the congressional process is yielding like good candidates, what do you think yourself? At
Wait, what do you
all?
mean by that?
I mean, did
Oh
you
no,
ever
they're
answer
not.
the
They're not.
question?
I
They're
think I
not.
did. I said they didn't, just because they don't align with like ideology.
Ah, yes, yes, yes. We were discussing just the way that you were
Yeah.
measuring it. I see, I see. Anyway,
Mhm.
yeah, and so that was just a way of for me to sort of like sneak in like a little poll thing as well, because there's a Gallup poll that had been taken in 2019 that basically said that over the last 10 years, and it was evaluating from, like over the last, I'm so sorry, over the last 30 years. So that would be from like 1989 to 2019, essentially. The congressional approval rate, Armand just nodded, so my math is correct. That's great. The congressional approval rate has never been over 30%. And that's insane. That means that 30% of Americans, like that is 30% of Americans approve of Congress.
Mhm.
70% of them don't. Is my
Or at
math
least
correct on that too?
apathetic. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. And then there was a Pew Research poll as well that said only 17% of the American people even trust the government.
Mhm.
And basically, there are just a lot of polls that say that around 30% think the Congress is doing a good job, and even fewer trust the government. And you can aggregate it between, like, whatever polls that are taken. But essentially, the problem is a very real one, where that
Mhm.
people don't generally feel like their government is functioning
Working for
correctly.
them specifically.
Yes,
Yeah.
for them versus five them. So it's
Mhm.
just unfortunate. Yeah,
And I think we can also just summarize that as the reason how Donald Trump got elected, with the whole idea of throwing a grenade in the
yeah,
political system because
yes,
no one else is appealing to you and no one else is trying to. And I think that's why we see such similar support between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump's movement. I think it was like 10% of Bernie Sanders' movement in 2016 who voted for him in the primaries, voted for Trump in the general, which is a huge shift. And the only way to reconcile those huge ideological differences that one had to jump through was just the idea of vision, the idea of feeling included in something. Um,
yes, yes,
and we probably could have
yeah,
talked about this more in the previous podcast on um, the different candidates, but looking at who they appealed to and who made up the quote unquote base really sheds light on who's being left out.
we
Um,
should definitely do that in a future thing too. That should definitely just
yeah.
be a whole thing by itself. That would be
Mhm.
amazing. Yeah, no, you're totally right. You're absolutely right.
And I
Yeah,
think what will tell you most about like where America actually stands.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's also that Trump's base and Bernie's base. When we think of the archetypal, like Bernie bro, kind of appealed to by Trump in the sense of how a lot of Trump's base were these sort of poor blue collar workers
Mhm.
that had definitely not seen any prosperity during the Obama era. So that is also someone who could very well look at Bernie and see some benefit as well. But
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely, a renegade in the system is what
These people
is
want.
what they both represented, and it's what they want. And I think it's something that America is addicted to as well. You know, just like someone that's going to change everything.
Hmm.
Whether that's good or not, I think is a interesting question to explore because
Yeah.
we're not data driven as a people. We definitely should be. So we should actually kind of have another episode where we see like, you know, has it actually turned out to be better? Has it turned out to be
Hmm.
that like renegades definitely perform better? That would be fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's this sort of like yeah. So we've established, right? It's a real
Hmm.
problem that the congressional process uh, it's yielded disappointing candidates and thus a disappointing, body.
Hmm.
But the reason why it hasn't changed, at least there are multiple reasons, but one great reason that you've kind of touched on is the barrier to entry, right? The
Hmm.
barrier to
Wait, could
even
you pause for a
becoming
sec?
a candidate. Oh yeah,
I think when we do record this for real, probably less focusing on Trump and Bernie, just because,
yes, we've done that too much.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, and also just trying to go through the like argument about why candidates are disappointing earlier and faster, um,
Yes.
because I think we did spend a little too much time, and I think, yeah,
What did we even talk about at the beginning? Because it wasn't even related to this topic. That's
just our
weird.
different metrics for disappointing, and
It's
um,
a weird form. This is such a weird format because we're not doing like a really tight scripted thing.
yeah,
And so it just meanders a little bit.
which
I'm
is
not
fine.
totally against it. I'm not against it, but it's
Yeah.
just very weird.
Hmm. I think
Anyway,
I'd
yeah.
rather have meanderings more at like the second part of this. If you're looking at I have the dock on the left side of my screen, and then you on the right side of my screen. Um,
I see.
I don't know if you have
No,
that
I'm
as well.
looking at the doc. I'm looking at the doc as well.
Yeah.
Wow. This is a lot of research. Jesus
Hmm.
Christ.
It was only over like 3 hours, for probably more than that, 4 hours.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway, let's do it.
back to it. Yeah.
All right.
So one of the things we've analyzed, and just something that I've been hearing more and more, is just what prevents people from actually running for Congress. And I made the argument before, but just the importance of primaries, because whoever wins the primary, of course, is who is representing the Democratic and Republican Party. And in an age in which people are always like, have been recently saying, vote blue no matter who. And there is sort of that um, dogmatic stance of supporting your party no matter what, that is in our times right now. Primaries really have a lot of impact. And so just analyzing what keeps people from running for office, um, just one of the biggest things we think really is oh, this is okay. It's just the um I was
I
trying to
mean,
find
yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff, right? I mean, like the first thing is uh like we should come clean in that we actually did research before coming into this thing, so we didn't just, talk about
ramble
stuff.
about this. Yeah.
Yeah. So like one real barrier is literally just the fact that incumbents don't leave.
Hmm.
Like it's kind of insane, but we had seen this. Where was the graph from? Do you remember? It was from this report.
This was from the Congressional Research Organization,
Yeah, yeah. Summarize what the report had said.
Congressional
I mean,
Research
just that
Service.
graph.
So it was really there was a ton of new information, really, just about the huge increase in politicians staying in office for 12 plus years that has continued, that has really like only gotten
It
worse year
shows
by year.
no signs of stopping. It shows no
Yeah.
signs of stopping. It's like you look at it and you're just seeing a straight line. It starts off at zero, right? But you're going to like 12 plus term or 12 plus years,
12 years.
and yeah, and who knows, in the future it's going to be 12 terms. Who cares? But like it's just, but it's huge, right? I mean, like these
Yeah.
people are just not leaving, and incumbents have almost like I don't know whether this is true, but it's like it's just if incumbents are there. It seems like
They have the natural advantage because
yes,
on the Democratic side,
familiarity. You know,
they have the party infrastructure. They have the
yeah,
DCCC, which is the Congressional Campaign Committee, supporting them with hundreds of millions of dollars. They have infrastructure in place for them to seek out party donors. They don't have to go through the new upheavals that challengers have to. And that's why you see most often when you only, there used to be the idea before of kind of like waiting your turn and uh, waiting for a representative or a senator to resign or not seek re-election before you get get a new face. And that's sort of being challenged right now. But really, up until recently, I would say 2018 or 2016, at least on the Democratic side, the idea of challengers and insurgents, they had no chance against incumbents.
yeah.
And so with these longest serving members of Congress who do not drop out on their own, who do not seek re-election, or who continue to seek re-election, newer members of Congress just have a tougher time.
Yeah, and this is not, by the way, a political. It's not a politicized problem. It's a problem on both sides of the aisle. Like
Mhm.
Democrats, as we were referencing, as Aarman was referencing, it's an insane problem that they go through because like
Mhm.
Nancy Pelosi again, she's a great example of a person that just won't leave. She is like, yeah, she's like that kid on the playground who's like hogging up all the swings or something. I don't know if you get that kind of metaphor.
You can
She's not
try and
leaving,
push them off, but like,
but they're like huge in the sense of like they're older than you, they're bigger than you, they're probably going to bully you because they have more money than you. Like it's all of that stuff. This metaphor doesn't really work. That's what I'm trying to say.
yeah, I think it does.
It only goes so far,
Mhm.
but it's insane. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and just looking at the actual like money in the system, and this has become more uh, the issue of money in politics has of course become more exacerbated since uh, what was it, FEC versus Citizens United in the Supreme Court decision that allowed pretty much unlimited campaign spending. Um,
Mhm.
the spending of so just looking at the averages, a winning candidate in a House of Representatives race, on average, had spent $1.3 million um, on their race, and
Yeah,
for senators, that was on average 10.4 million. So seeing the huge amount that is needed, um, it's insane. And of course, there's the argument of, oh, people can still fund elections on their own. We saw numerous candidates do that, even like Ross Perot, who's way back, who's pretty old, but when he was running for president, he was self-financed. Michael
yeah.
Bloomberg didn't accept. I don't think he accepted a single donation. Um,
Right. I mean, he is like worth 50 billion, but
yeah,
yeah, right.
not everyone is worth 50 billion.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a huge. It's huge.
But it's also more important that in 2016, for instance, 95.4% of House elections were won by the candidate that spent the most. This is specifically speaking toward the general, but it's so interesting how money matters. And so for a representative, hearing that statistic, 95.4% will win by raising more money.
Yeah,
You
and the
need to
money that
raise,
you. Sorry.
oh no,
Sorry.
you need to raise over $1 million every 2 years. It's insane. It's mind-boggling. And to
Absolutely.
imagine any insurgent trying to raise that much without really appealing to big money interests, it's hard. And looking at like where that money goes to, I think like most people say it's $1 million. What happens with it? Well, you need to build up a campaign infrastructure. You need people to conduct polling, campaign strategy, organize events, social media, and like contacting media outlets, and even just collecting more donations. It's a business essentially. Um, and you need as many people to handle the ship as possible. I think this would be a good time to mention the insurgents, by the way.
The insurgents?
The AOC,
No, no, no,
Presley.
for sure.
I was thinking of talking about them, but I wasn't sure when to sort of drop them in because it's.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, okay. So let's unpause, right? So the we're talking about incumbents and then the insane barrier to entry that there is in just
Hmm.
nominating yourself and running. And we've seen over the past few years that the only way to really become like a nominee is to be part of a greater movement, right? And so that's
Hmm.
what AOC came from, and she came from an organization. You said it was Justice Democrats, right?
Hmm.
And so that was an organization that was like nominating people all over the country and pushing them into campaigns and making sure that they had the support that was needed. So it
Hmm.
was still a broader organization, you know.
Hmm. And it
Um,
by no means had the infrastructure the DCCC had.
no, not at all, not at all. And it should be noted, it's not like it was this insanely successful initiative. It's still going, Justice
Hmm.
Democrats, but it's not like I don't know. I mean, AOC is just she's more of like an exception rather than a rule.
Hmm.
Similar thing with what is it, the Swing Left organization that's
Yeah,
come out.
there's a lot more popping up now, and the main reason with this, well, unlike the on the Republican side, uh, the DCCC and the DNC actually help intervene in primaries to help the incumbent win, so they don't have to spend as much fighting a primary battle and can focus their money on the general election. And regardless of whether like we think that's a good or bad thing, it is a winning strategy. Um, and on the Republican side, they actually the RNC in the Republican National Campaign Committee, which is the Republican version of the DCCC, they have a policy of staying neutral in primary fights. Wait, give me a sec. Pause.
Do 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 do, bippity bappity bam, boom boom, boom boom boom. Wow 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 wow. Da do 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 do. Wow 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 wow. Wow wow wow. Wow wow. Wow wow wow. 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 Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
sorry. What was the thing? Oh yeah, but the RNC doesn't have that. The RNC doesn't have that problem, and they actually remain neutral in primary fights, which is how the Tea Party movement actually took over. And you can see the Tea Party almost analogous as to the progressive movement on the Democratic side, in which, first of all, John Boehner was Speaker
Boehner.
of the House before Boehner. I remember that. He was Speaker of the House before Paul Ryan, and
He was. He
Paul
was.
Ryan, through the Tea Party movement, was able to pretty much kick out John Boehner into resignation because of the force of the Tea Party movement. Primaries are a
Yeah.
huge deal.
What? Wait, that's not what happened.
What? Yes?
No, Paul Ryan became Speaker of the House a long time after the Tea Party thing had happened.
Yes. No, but I'm saying that Boehner resigned because of it.
No, Boehner resigned like just because it was like the end of his. I mean, he had just been Speaker of the House for a long time. I'm so, wait, is this true? The narrative, at least at that time, was that just Boehner was like tired in that sense.
Well, I thought a lot of it was due to the like overwhelming force of the uh, Tea Party, because the Tea Party essentially held him hostage into
But
getting.
probably how would he have been Speaker of the House if he was opposed to like a major movement within his own party?
Hmm? No, that was one of the problems.
That he would
Okay, I won't mention that then because I'm shaky on the details.
no, because it was just the timing doesn't make any sense, right? Because isn't the Tea Party like 2011 ish?
Yeah, yes.
And then when did he resign? He resigned like
2015.
yeah.
Okay, fair. Yeah, let's not mention it.
This is good. This is good. We should get through all the sort of things that we.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah, but the DCCC can control hundreds of millions of dollars, and they can control which elections that goes to. Um.
Yes.
And beyond just that, the DCCC actually has a policy, and this was in response to many of the insurgents, progressive insurgents beating longtime incumbents like AOC and Ayanna Presley. The DNC implemented a policy in 2019 so that they blacklisted um, political consulting firms and campaign firms who worked against incumbents. Essentially,
Well,
that.
essentially, even if you had all the, even if you like, even if you didn't have the money, but you still found some eager people, eager political strategists and consultants that believed in your message and they wanted to help you and you're an insurgent candidate, they still probably won't because even if they're just motivated by like a political responsibility, they don't want to get blacklisted for their whole career, you know?
Mhm.
So it's, what you're saying is that the barrier is just like it just keeps getting pushed up in just different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And like one issue like I was raising because of this and just seeing how much influence the DNC and the DCCC has, there was the common idea that only moderates were able to win back the House
Yeah.
um, in 2018. Well, there's also a huge barrier to progressives with the intervention of the DNC. Like
Right. Resources just don't want.
if blacklisting did not happen, if there, these insurgents could have access to the same uh, proper political infrastructure and party infrastructure, would we see a rise in progressives? And would we see progressives actually winning more and more seats? Who knows?
I just had this pause. I just had this idea. This is kind of separate from like the actual podcast, but I feel like in the future, because I realize that we keep talking about the same few ideas sometimes, we
Mm-hmm.
should dedicate like we should have like these like 5 minute, 10 minute segments that are just about these concepts that we feel are not being talked about enough. Do you get what I'm saying? So like
Yeah.
the blacklisting, I feel like is a very good topic, or
Mm-hmm.
the you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Anyway, because then it would just make it more consumable as well. Anyway, unpause.
Mm-hmm. um. Yeah. And also, just for instance, many like Democratic leadership members in the House have helped push candidates to drop out in favor of party-backed candidates. There have numerous instances. Actually, Steny Hoyer, who is the second highest command Democrat after in the House after Nancy Pelosi, was actually recorded in 2018 encouraging a candidate to drop out in favor of the party-backed candidate in a Colorado primary race. And then numerous other instances in which like Vox and The Intercept have been really adamant about reporting on these. Just the DNC's interventions, the whole deal with 2016 and the sort of coronation of Hillary Clinton and then Bernie Sanders' challenge of that is another huge example of that. Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, generally, I mean, the barrier is there, and I think we've talked about the primary barrier. So I guess we've also
Mhm.
gone over this point. It's thankfully we can be as rough as we want in this sort of take of it, and then when we do it tomorrow,
Yeah.
it'll be much more smoother. But anyway, one important thing I think to talk about after we get over this. Ah, shoot, I messed up the whole transition. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Anyway, an important point right after just the incumbents and all that is that why does this sort of disappointment continue on the voter end of it? Because the candidate supply of it, if we're going like economics wise, right, we know that the supply of candidates are disappointing because it's always going to be incumbents. It's always going to be, you have a high barrier, so there's just less room for change, for innovation in terms of political candidates,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense. But in the sense of, actual voting, that is a huge contribution to the disappointment of the political process in a very concrete way, in the
Mhm.
sense of simply voters don't vote. Most voters, they just don't vote enough. They don't vote as much as they should to maintain a healthy democracy, a democracy that promotes ideas that are radical and are beneficial to people.
Mhm.
So one important thing to analyze when discussing this is voter turnout, right? Like how many people
who can vote, who are eligible to vote, who are legally allowed to vote, how many of them actually do vote? Because eligibility is a whole other topic, and I think we should definitely talk about it, right? Like, can felons vote? Like redistricting, gerrymandering, all of that stuff.
Even
That is,
student voting and like college
yes,
voting and
and all of that is very real. And right now, there's a whole thing about mail-in voting and electronic voting, and all of that stuff matters a lot. But just bare voter turnout, like you're eligible to vote, but how many of you will vote? So voter turnout from about 1980 to 2016, as per an MIT study. This was basically a election lab data science thing they had done on years, and so on years are defined as basically presidential election years. So it had been basically between 50 and 60%. 1980 to 2016, voter turnout was 50 to 60%, which is, in my mind, kind of disappointing. That's pretty low. But voter turnout for off years, now this is purely congressional elections, no presidential elections, substantially lower, right? From 1980 to 2016, it's between 35 and 42%. Now, the difference is insane. That's like a difference on the
Mhm.
order of like 10 to 20%. But also just the fact that, like this entire country is founded on the principle that you should be able to your vote on your leaders, you should be able to vote on the people that represent you. Now, the fact that the people are not voting as much as they should and are still disappointed with the candidates that represent them feels a little like there's a contrast, like it doesn't match. Do you understand what I'm saying?
And I think this is most interesting to see. And also, I don't know if you have the numbers for primaries. How many people actually vote in non-presidential primaries? Because as we like mentioned earlier, for instance, in like Brooklyn and Manhattan, Democrats are always going to win, just like in LA and like other
Yeah,
major
so
Democratic
primary
strongholds.
is a real conflict there. Yeah.
Exactly. And if we aren't paying attention to who wins the primaries and just where the differences are, we're also
Yeah.
not paying attention to who like actually wins.
This is for
Um,
sure. Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to cite a movie. Can I cite a movie on
cite a
this?
movie. Cite a movie.
Oh, it's a movie called Knock Down the House. I saw it on Netflix,
Oh,
and it's the
I still
AOC.
haven't watched
No, it's
it.
a great movie. I will. It's a fantastic movie, and so it's about AOC's like process and how she went through the whole nomination process and all of that. She had to galvanize a ton of voters. She had to build a
Mhm.
whole coalition, right? It wasn't just as simple as finding people to like vote for like her and like, oh, she's just going to convert people. It didn't happen that easily. But once she had done so, and you remember this and I remember this, it was like in 2018, she was done, right? Once she had
Mhm.
won the primary, she had basically won. So these conflicts are insane. But to me, it's this sort of like, it's this very disappointing, very, very disappointing thing where if if such few Americans think that their Congress represents them effectively, then logically they should vote for a better Congress, right?
Mhm.
But voter turnout, just there's a huge disparity between the demographics of voting.
Mhm.
Like if people with less than a high school education, usually they vote on the order of like 44% of them vote. If you have more than a high school education, you have more than a diploma, university education, so on, 77% vote. You're just more likely. There's a disparity between income. If you make less than 50,000 a year, you're it's likely that your group is 50% likely to vote. More than 50,000 a year, 69% are going to vote. There's a huge disparity in age where the older you get, the more likely you vote. And there's a huge disparity in race where white people are 65% likely to vote, whereas Hispanic and Asian American people, they're on the order of like 45% will vote. That's insane, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're an Asian person, if you're an Asian American person, and if most Asian Americans are not voting, there's not a surprise then that there's less Asian Americans in Congress.
Hmm.
If more old people are voting, it's not unsurprising that most of Congress is old. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the educational disparity also, it matters a lot, because we are, again, a different topic, which I think we should totally get into once we start doing tech stuff later on, is that like, a lot of people are blue collar workers and a lot of people don't have university educations. If they
Hmm.
are not being represented in Congress, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that Congress people shouldn't have university educations, but if they are not being represented, that's also problematic, because they
Hmm.
are Americans as well.
And the
So
interesting thing is, the politicians only have to worry about voters. They don't have to worry about people who are not voting, and that's why we see. And this is the interesting dilemma, I guess, just with the Democratic Party. There has been so little focus on actually relying on Black voters and Hispanic voters, while not really providing their interest and taking that into consideration. And to be honest, it's a genuine question of how many people does the Democratic Party essentially use to win elections and doesn't use when they have they don't promote their interest when they are in power.
yeah, for sure. And it also comes to mind that, like, how few people are actually needed to win an election. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
yes.
national, what you just said is completely true, and it's a great way of framing a pretty disappointing statistic, right? Like,
Hmm.
congressional legislators, that's a stupid phrase. They represent they don't represent 100% of the country. They actually mathematically represent 40% of the country.
Hmm.
In that way, the president doesn't represent 100% of the country. The president's only really appealing to maybe 60% of the country.
And even then, how many people actually voted for them?
Yeah,
For the
yeah, yeah.
president,
Probably.
30% of the country voted for Donald Trump then.
Actually, it's true. Absolutely,
That's
right?
insane.
Yeah. And so, in that sense, and I use I use represent in a weird way.
Hmm.
Donald
They're
Trump.
making decisions on the whole population while
Yes,
only needing the support of the 30% or of the 20%.
exactly.
This
That
is
would
not
be.
what we should have in a functioning, proper
Yeah,
democracy.
I'm trying to come up with a metaphor off the top of my head. I can't. It's a little. It's
It's okay.
it's really bad, but yeah, exactly. And so,
Mhm.
you know, I just want to reference something that MIT was talking about how to sort of solve this problem, because I think that we don't do any real work as a podcast if we just talk about problems and don't talk about potential solutions, because I think that they matter way more. And
Mhm.
so MIT said that a lot of the election reforms that have been proposed, like election day registration, which is basically just having everyone register on election day, vote by mail. This implied early voting, right, or photo ID. A lot of them are not like highly correlated with promoting voter turnout.
Mhm.
The most successful is election day registration, but even then, that's not
Mhm.
huge. So it's in that sense, it's just very difficult to sort of understand what'll help. But one thing that they did point out is that if there was a much higher voter turnout, it's very likely that the political opinion would actually skew heavily in the other way. So it's not like the 40% that are voting are representing the 100% of American people. It's
Mhm.
not. It turns out that their political opinions are actually different, and so it turns out that, like, if more people voted, it's more likely that, like, voters in national elections are going to be opposed to specifically Republican and redistributive social, like,
Mhm.
platform social issues. Or yeah,
Wait,
no,
say that again? No.
I said that in the exact dumbest way. I keep saying this in the dumbest way. Okay. So the point that they make is that voters in national elections are more likely to be Republican and to oppose redistributive social policies than non-voters.
Mhm.
And so if these non-voters voted, they would vote the exact opposite, right? So they would
So you're
promote.
essentially saying that the electorate, the voting body of people, is more conservative than the actual general American population.
Perfect. And that's the line I'm going to use tomorrow because that just makes more sense, right? And I'm going to write it down too because I've been messing that up so much. It's also such an easy line. Voter body is
Okay.
more conservative than non-voters. Anyway, so yeah,
I mean,
it's
not even the non-voters, then just the general American population.
yeah, absolutely.
And we can see this with just issues on climate change, on gun control, on abortion even. So many of these, maybe not abortion, but so many of these issues are clear, like 70% of Americans think are urgent. I don't have the numbers on me, of course, but why don't we see Congress take action against this? Well, it's because the voters are more conservative than the general American population. And
Yes, yes.
voters, and like, that's why it's so interesting to see how people talk about getting out the vote. And genuinely, I only start believing it when I hear these numbers.
And I mean, when you see these numbers, right? So it seems like the archetypal voter is old, is white, has a high school diploma or higher,
And
and,
makes a decent amount of money.
and makes a decent amount of money. And that is not, as it turns out, the vast majority of America. The vast majority of America is different in different ways. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're just not being represented correctly. They're being
Mm-hmm.
represented by one, and I'm not one of those people that say like old white guys are bad. They're not. They're people. But the problem is that they're not all the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? But you
No,
brought
that's
up
really well said.
about how voters care about these issues and that they're not, and they just aren't voting enough. So I I wanted to sort of measure something else that I thought could talk about, how are voters contributing to, this disappointing political process. So I wanted to talk about voter confidence. Now,
Mm-hmm.
both you and I have taken economics, right? And so we know consumer confidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that how that measures the health of an economy. And essentially, the way consumer confidence works is that if the consumers believe that the economy is strong, like that is it's a great measure of, you know, the actual economy itself, right? And in that sense, voter confidence is essentially the measure of, how much belief do individual voters have in the political process. And my reasoning is that voter confidence, if it's very high, probably means that it's a very healthy democracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they think that their votes are being counted, if voters believe in the political process, they will probably utilize it correctly. They will probably utilize it more. Now, you already kind of know where this is heading, right? I won't go through the whole thing of it, but you already, listening to my tone of voice and everything, you probably know what voter confidence is like in this country. So this is again from MIT's election lab. They did some really good analysis about voter confidence. So the question I was asked by political scientists to measure voter confidence was, and they asked this to basically every single participant in their surveys and all the data that they used, do you believe that the votes in the most recent election were counted as cast? Think about how basic that question is. It's not even asking, do you believe that your representative represents you? It's not,
It's
do you
essentially
believe
saying,
that
like, do you think your vote is
it's
like
the
is actually
vote
making a
that you
difference?
put down? Do you believe that it was counted? That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
literally it. And so in the pre-election question, 40% of respondents overall were confident their own vote were counted as intended. Words. Were confident their own vote would be counted as intended, and 35% were confident that others would be counted as intended. And then the percentages dropped considerably as the range went further away from themselves. So it was 40 when it was about themselves, 35 when it was about the people in their own county, 27 when it was about the people in the state, and then
Mm-hmm.
19. They were sorry,
19% of people on the
19%
survey.
of recipients were confident that the votes cast on a national scale were counted accurately. So, like 80% of people don't even believe that the political process works on a national scale.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like I don't want to sound hysteric or anything because that's a terrible tone of voice or anything. But that's just it's weird, right? I would just say
Yeah.
that like, I feel like that's the only way for me to sort of respond to that in a calm way, which it doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
You know? And yeah, the numbers vary depending on like what kind of poll you look at, but not to a crazy.
Considerably.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So MIT goes for 20%. A Gallup poll showed that it was 35% or 30% depending on like the year. And Trump has contributed to this a little bit, right? Trump has called into question this, but this has been true for a little bit.
And
And
this is before him, of course, too.
yeah, and so it's if you're in the mindset of like whatever action you do, it doesn't matter. If that many people think the process just doesn't, it's just rigged. Essentially, that's kind of what that says, right?
Hmm.
It's sort of saying 80% of people are just saying like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what these people vote, right? It doesn't matter what I vote. It doesn't matter what you vote. It doesn't matter what the country votes. That result's just going to be that way.
Hmm.
That's just disappointing, right? And we're always going to have a disappointed candidate. We're going to have a disappointed populace. We're going to have a disappointing like
Hmm.
congressional representative.
Hmm.
So that was my thing on voter confidence, and I thought it was a very interesting way to sort of measure. And
Analyzing
with
it, yeah.
voter confidence, it seems like we have a very unhealthy democracy.
Hmm.
What do you think?
No, I think this is interesting. I think just looking beyond, um, I guess, like the candidates themselves, it genuinely makes sense why people would vote for Trump. And I think with those numbers in mind, and this is something I've criticized a lot of people for, like not trying to understand what leads a person to make that decision. And like people end up just painting Trump supporters as whatever image they want, rather than actually seeking to understand them. Of course, not all Trump supporters are in that number. Um, but as we talked about before, you have to have a certain lack of belief in the system in order to vote for a renegade and to vote for a grenade in the system.
For sure. And also, Trump is not the first renegade of the American political
Hmm.
system. So that's how we kind of intuitively know that this sort of like lack of belief in the political process exists. And
Hmm.
again, I'm not saying that we should necessarily be like fully gung ho about the political process. We should have a healthy dose of skepticism. But I think there's a fine line between, being skeptical about whether politicians mean what they mean and say what they say, and like just believing that your votes are being accurately counted.
Hmm.
That's a completely different thing. And it's really disappointing. And I think if it's true, if that sentiment is true in the sense of if it's validated and like people think or people are correct basically and their votes are not being accurately counted, that's a huge problem, right?
Hmm.
Then why vote, right?
Hmm.
If it's not true, then that's another huge problem because that means that we're
Hmm.
letting cynicism,
Get the best of us.
get the best of us, which is very possible. I do that all the time. It's
Hmm.
very possible, um, and that's very injurious.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I think one of I was thinking mainly just taking away from all this, just the importance of media in primaries. Again, just going back to that, if so little people like if it's so hard to learn about primary fights going on, I genuinely don't even know any that are happening right now. And like what the media has to have some role in at least shedding light on this and like returning that trust back, or even just saying. And this is why I'm a huge proponent of local um, newspaper, just because that would allow people to see differences in the primary contenders, and it's hard to see that.
I agree. We need an app that's gonna. We need
Do
something
all
that
this for us.
does all this for us. That brings back that whole local political,
Hmm.
spice, that zest. That like.
Yeah.
No, but we need more knowledge of our local politics and our local representatives, because they are much more impactful than we believe, right?